Ngā mihi o te ata, and welcome everyone. It's great to see all the familiar faces here and some new ones to look at this very interesting issue. Welcome one and all, but a special welcome to our overseas visitors. We've got David Harris from Tor Consulting and Nick Sherry from Australia. David is a particularly supportive person of this small, struggling centre, keeps an eye on us from overseas and has been a marvellous source of encouragement and financial support. So he's sponsored his session later on this morning on the international scene, which I'm sure you will find really, really interesting. So thank you, David. I believe you flew 27 hours to be here, and you were at the Dawn Parade in Sydney yesterday. So well done. We appreciate it. He needs sleep. Well, Claire and I feel a bit like that, and I wanted just to start off by acknowledging Claire Dale, who's the Research Fellow in the Research Policy and Retirement Centre. Without Claire, this day would not have happened.
Well, without Susan,
Well, we have been a bit like one-armed paper hangers, so please forgive us if there are minor glitches throughout the day. It is a very tight timetable that we have today. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I also want to acknowledge the presence of people from the Commission here. Of course, this is the year of their review, and we are very pleased to be working with them, and we offer them our every encouragement and support for a really worthwhile 2019 retirement income review. So the purpose of today is for us to start talking about this issue. Time is pretty short. Peter, do you know when you have to report? Is it by August? December, final by December. So I'm sure that in the breaks and at lunchtime, having a chat with people from the Commission would be really, really valued by them, and I'm sure that they will welcome any input from anybody or any of the experts in this room. We've got out-of-town speakers that I need to acknowledge as well, people who got on a 6 a.m. flight this morning. We really appreciate that. And we have Mary Home here, and it's lovely to see you, Mary. Now, I'm not mentioning everybody else who's important, but just take it as read that you're all very important and we welcome you. What we're doing, as I've just said, is not the review itself, obviously. It's a kickstart to the review. It's the opportunity for the experts to put on the table what they think is important. And we've asked our speakers to do the impossible, to talk for a very short amount of time on a topic that they feel very passionate about, but to be very constrained in the time that they take. So perhaps the first thing we should mention is the timing. Julie Timmins in the front here is going to be keeping people to time, the 3 minute, the 1 minute, and it's time's up, time's up. There will be more information on the overheads than we can possibly get through in the time, but we will be putting a proceedings together, so you'll be able to access that online later on.
We're also recording the
Yes, yes. So there'll be an audio as well. If you would just have a look at the pack that you've been given, you'll find the program, and the timing is tight, so we would appreciate it if you do get back from the breaks. We are actually having a break. We're not renowned for having breaks at the RPRC, but you're getting morning tea. But please be back on time so that we can get started again. So the bios, we are not going to spend a lot of time introducing people. We've provided full bios that you can see there, so as we go through sequentially, you can read all about the person. So the chairs know that they don't have to do an elaborate introduction. And very important, health and safety, if you go right to the back of the pack, you will find all that you ever would need to know about how to escape if there's any adverse thing that happens, and where the bathrooms are, and probably a lot more information than that if you look at it closely. So please do read that, and it will save me having to go through it. And then of course there's cell phone etiquette, which I'm sure you're all familiar with as well. So when we look also at the pack, you'll find the terms of reference, and I'm sure when you look at those, you'll see that there is a new flavour, there is a wellbeing flavour, there is a concern about the marginalised. And this is very welcome. We've got a wellbeing budget coming up, so the things are a bit different this year. Today's a taster of the debates to come, and there will be 5 major themes. Starting with the first one, we felt that it would be interesting and important to look back at our history, draw on some of the expertise of those who've been involved in past reviews to see what are the lessons, what can be learned, and so on. And so I'll say a few words in a minute, and then Michael Littlewood, followed by Diana Crossan. Okay, so I want to start 40 years ago. If you quickly put your minds back 40 years, I know some of you are far too young. But many of us were around 1975 election. What was the critical issue? It was whether we were going to keep Labour's compulsory savings scheme, or we were going to go with Moulding's bribe of national superannuation. We know what happened, we know who won. We all got our money back from the compulsory scheme that we'd been contributing to, 4% employee, 4% employer, and that was dead and buried. 1978, how did it look? We had a fully universal state pension for everybody at age 60, which was about 80% of the average wage for a couple. So it was very generous at that point. Let's fast forward to 1985, when the surcharge came into effect with the Labour government, who gave us all this nasty shock of this surcharge. 1985, it was extremely contentious and a lot of very, very bitter debates. At the end of the 1980s, Tony Ashton and I wrote a book to try to sort of express the feeling of what was going on in superannuation at the time. It's funny how time flies. We thought it was quite funny to put that picture up there 30 years ago. It doesn't seem quite so funny today. So tempus fugit. Time is going past very quickly, and I think that's one of the things that we'd like to come out of today, that there's some urgency. Now, in the book that I've just shown you, we tried to think about first principles. We tried to think about what is retirement income policy for? What are we actually trying to do? What are our aims? And we can think about 4 levels. There's poverty alleviation, where people have to be poor before they're helped, like a charity model. Poverty prevention, so people have enough that they don't fall into poverty, or a bit more than that, they have enough to feel they can belong and participate in society, or further, that they can continue the kind of incomes that they had in their working lives. Well, value judgments have to be made about what the purpose of retirement income actually is. And we might all have slightly different value judgments. But I think if we look at what has been in place in public policy over the last 30 years, we can discern that we want to do more than just poverty prevention, that our policies are about a degree of belonging and participation. And while we're not going as far as income continuance, that we think it's a good thing for people to have the ability to provide some degree of income continuance. So when we think about the purpose of retirement incomes policies, the purpose of the policies is to meet our agreed aims. So we've just seen what the aims seem to be. How do we get there? And in another book that we wrote in 1993, we suggested that you could look at the range of public interventions, or state interventions, as on a spectrum, going at the top end from doing nothing through to bribing people to save, to compelling people to save privately, to arranging compulsory superannuation through the state, and then further down, letting go of the contributory principle altogether, having a social insurance type approach, coming further down, becoming even more redistributive as you go down until you end up at the far end with just a welfare benefit. Now, the truth of the matter is that countries don't just do one thing, they do a combination of some of those things, and every country is different. So, for example, if you're thinking about compulsory state savings scheme, that could have described the 1974 Labour scheme in New Zealand, but with that there was other provisions of welfare as well. So Europeans also would be putting the emphasis on social insurance, where there's a contributory principle. People put in and therefore they deserve what they get out, and generally there are earnings-related pensions paid out. So jumping now to 1991, the watershed of the budget, the mother of all budgets, which I'm sure you will all remember. I can remember being so deeply shocked to hear that budget being read out at the time, because it was so transformational. And when we look at that spectrum of interventions that I put up on the previous slide, what 1991 budget did was to give us the most extreme version of retirement income policies in the developed world. We didn't actually have a policy, and it was extremely unpopular. So we had a voluntary saving, or you got a welfare benefit, and that was it. And nobody liked it. And of course, we know that those changes, even though they were written into law with an all-night budget sitting, didn't stick. I've got 1 minute. So by the end of 1991, we were back to a basic state pension, a tighter surcharge, a rapid rising of the age to 65 over 10 years, and a desire, that's my talk about cell phone etiquette. It's very, very embarrassing. We said that it wasn't going to be perfect, all right? So back to my train of thought, that by the end of 1991 we'd walked away from the budget provisions, and what was supposed to happen was that the government wanted a task force to tell them how to solve the mess that they'd created with private provision. Michael.